Hello, everyone. My name is 4AS, and this is the Revolutionary Think Tank podcast. This is a podcast about revolutionary thinking, protest music, and political commentary. This is episode 22, and like I said before, I'm 4AS, and this is my co-host, Mr. E. So, Mr. E, how are you going today?
I am very well for IS. How are you?
Yeah, I'm going pretty good. And you know what? This is a really good episode because I think we have another topic where we're crossing over in terms of what we've kind of been discussing. Like lately, you've been diving into the idea of data. So, what I would call you've been focusing much more on the microeconomic side of things, whereas we'll go into this kind of idea later. But I've actually been investigating Yanis Varoufakis' concept of techno feudalism. But before we go delve into that, I feel like we should deal with the microeconomic ideas first and your ideas about data because they're very interesting.
Okay, all right. So you're referring to obviously the one of the more later videos that I put out about data slavery, as I
Yes.
would like to call it.
Mm,
And it's very much the idea of, well, let's go back to, a fundamental piece of capitalism is the idea that labor creates all value. And when a laborer or a group of
mm,
laborers go to work using the means of production, so raw materials and, let's say it's in a factory and some type of machinery, and then they work on that machinery with those
mm,
resources and they produce something, they are producing value or some type of new value. They transfer value across, and then those means of production then gets sold in a marketplace somewhere. And the thing that adds this value is labor. It's not the resources themselves, it's not the machinery, it's the work that somebody puts into it that creates all of this value. And that is then sold at a higher price, that
mm,
product. And the whole capitalist system works off this idea of surplus value.
mm,
Okay, so you start with a certain amount of value, they put labor magically is added to the system and magically produces more value that was put in before. And that is then what a capitalist will make a profit on.
mm,
So surplus value is like integral. It's the foundation of the capitalist system. But
mm.
when you go into, let's say, the digital realm, okay, you have people, and this is not a surprise to anyone. Like, people talk about this sort of stuff all the time.
Mm.
Let's talk about cookies or accepting somebody's terms and conditions, right? You go into
Yeah.
somebody's website, you're entering into their private space. Okay, and you have to follow their terms and conditions, their rules of engagement, all that sort of stuff. And you usually sign up to it or you say it's okay to be tracked. But what they are doing is they're collecting, obviously, your data. They're
Mm.
collecting what sites you've been to, I guess what things you've interacted with, what you've liked and engaged with. They collect all of that information. Again, this is no surprise to anyone, and they will on-sell that information to a third party or they will collect it for their own use. But
Mm.
also, while you're on their platform, while you're on their website, you're interacting with things on their platform or other third-party platforms, and you're creating something. You're creating more data,
Mm.
right? And data is value.
Yes.
It's absolutely valuable. Actually, there's multi-billion dollar industries set up out there and existing out there that is using your data on a daily basis. If anyone out there that has one of those smart watches, for instance, that, you know, reads your heartbeat
Mm.
24 hours a day or tells you if you've slept well at night. Like, while we might think that those things are just wonderful to have and like we've, never had so much information out of disposal to help us and our personal health, well, they're not doing that. because they just love to help you or they're worried about your health. They're collecting trends and data. And while that might not be personal, they might not specifically put a name to your data, which I think they do, they're collecting mega and meta trends. All right. And then they're figuring out what's happening on population wide scales, or maybe even localized. This is what's happening to people's health. This is just an example
Mm,
in this part of the world or this region of this country and all that sort of stuff. So but the big thing here is that in capitalism, if labor creates additional value and that creates all the profit that like feeds the entire system, in the digital realm, data is the value in the system.
mm,
That's what's creating all the value. Don't get me wrong, there's a lot of monetary exchanges online and all that sort of stuff, but data is created by people's presence online. The
mm,
money exists outside the system. The data, though, exists completely in the digital realm, and it's you that creates that. Your existence on the
mm,
internet at large creates data, and your actions creates even more data. And that follows you around like a little
mm.
data ghost or a little profile, like that episode of South Park where Stan's profile becomes larger than himself. That
Yes.
profile follows you around.
Mm,
You have no access to that profile, or if you do have access to it, you have no control over it. And every time you enter into somebody else's site, their private digital space, you are relinquishing any rights that you have to your data to be mined completely for free. And so if you're
mm,
creating all the value that's out there in the digital realm by your existence, your labor, your actions is creating value. Just like in capitalism, where
mm,
work creates value, your existence, your interactions online creates all of this value. But one, not only do you not have any control over it, two, you most likely don't even know it exists. And
mm.
three, you have for sure are not compensated for it at all. And the
Yes.
realization, or even the I guess the fanciful notion that someone might be compensated for it, it's just laughable.
Yes.
And then no one seems to be talking about this at all. So
Yeah.
really, if you're not paid or compensated in the slightest for anything,
Yeah.
you're a slave.
Yes, I'm kind of glad you brought that up because I'll do three quick points myself of everything that you've kind of just been talking about. One, I'm glad you kind of brought up that point of it's really the data that kind of creates the value because at least when Marx was analyzing what he was doing in Capital, the idea of money going into commodities, going into money, and that sort of circulation for the surplus value,
Mm,
in this world, this data world, that sort of model is completely disrupted, and I'm guessing it would just be. Um, Commodity going into money, and that's about it because that's kind of where the data is created and that's where the value is created. Also, too, which really is probably where you're going with the ideas of accepting cookies and also accepting those terms and conditions, is that people are being lulled into this idea of, oh, I can create a Gmail account for free. I can do all of this stuff for free. And
yes. Yeah.
isn't this such a great thing? But the
Mm,
thing though is that it's kind of gone into a bit of a faux labor value idea where you're still instead of money, like trading your labor for money for a wage, it's almost as if you're trading your your data for these terms and conditions and getting, that free Gmail account, that free app.
mm,
That's where
mm.
you're still trading your labor value, but it just happens to be data value this time. It's
Yes.
just a different world. And
Yes.
three, I guess we never thought we were going to circle back to this, because I think 6 months ago we were kind of talking about this, that if we were going to create our own socialist society, what would we want as, rights? I remember us very much talking about this early on, that about data and how if we really wanted a better society, we would make our own data a right, that we have a
Yes.
right to understand what that data is, and if not that, have a say as to what companies do with our data.
Mm.
Not be well, I wouldn't say coerced, but at least be rushed into a decision of signing T's and C's that are hundreds of pages long that really you were never going to read even in the first
No,
place.
that's right. Yeah, it's an absolute joke to think that anyone would actually read the terms and conditions before like signing up to a site. Or like maybe there is a fraction of the population, like a really, really small, less than a percentage of a population. Or maybe if it's really, really important, like you're doing online banking or something like that, people might sit down and read the terms and conditions, or they're about to make a massive purchase in the thousands of dollars or tens of thousands or hundreds, whatever. But most people don't read the terms and conditions if they just wanted to play a new game or
Mm.
like download, some type of filter to use on their camera or something like that.
Yeah,
Like the
yeah,
people
yeah.
aren't going to do that. It's the instant gratification that is preyed upon in order to have people relinquish any rights that they have over their data. And like you were saying, people make these kind of momentary decisions in order to get access to something that they need, and they just say, oh, who cares? It's about convenience, right?
Mm,
And that's what, yes, they prey upon, is this idea of convenience. But they want something for you. Nothing is for free. They
mm,
want your data. They want access to what you've got and like what's on your phone. They have access to all the other apps and maybe even your camera and your library of photos and all of this sort of stuff. So they can analyze you and they can sell you a product better, or they can put you into a category with other consumer bases so they can tailor ads or tailor products to sell to you or to better target your type of audience or demographic. There is nothing free out there. And like actually it's the free ones are probably the nastiest. If at
mm,
least you pay for something, then you've traded it off and they probably got something out of you. That app legitimately wants to be paid because they want the app for that app
mm,
purpose, not for just for data mining. Most free things, as we've learned through the years with various Facebook scandals and
mm,
Analytica scandals and all this type of stuff, all the free things are there to actually just mine information
mm,
off you. So yes, people make these decisions and some people will often say, well, like, I don't care about all that sort of stuff. And like, I'm happy actually to have, an algorithm or some website actually tell me what I want because it
mm,
just knows you so well. It's incredible, actually,
mm,
how well they know you. I would argue, or I would say, just based on a little bit of research, that, they probably know you better than you do. If you've ever
mm,
been on Spotify and you've listened to a random string of songs, the ability for the algorithm to
mm.
suggest something to you next that you'll actually like based on previous decisions has almost unerring accuracy sometimes.
Yeah.
It's almost scary, really. And that's just musical tastes. Think about all the other things that you do online that are being tracked in terms of your habits.
Mm. Yeah, I actually want to use this
Valuable.
opportunity. Yes, yes, very valuable. And I kind of want to use this opportunity with data to explain a story that maybe some of the gamers in our audience might relate to. And what I want to talk about is the idea with gaming and microtransactions. So I feel like this is basically data and used for more nefarious reasons. So if you talk to any gamer now, like any of the kind of big blockbuster games, what you'll actually find is compared to, say, for example, 80s and 90s, the the classic era of your games such as like Doom or any of the arcade games. You pay you pay a quarter, you pay a buck or something, and then you get a chance to play the entire game. You had, at least if you had that CD-ROM, if you had that $1 that you could put into the arcade machine, you had access to an entire game.
Mm,
Now, in this data world, um, microtransactions with games is what you're actually given is maybe quarter of a product or maybe half of a product,
mm,
but what's actually happened in these games, especially if they're online games when you're versing other people, is you're given the base amount of equipment. Let's say that it's a shooting game where you're given the base equipment, in terms of guns and all of that. But what ends up happening is it turns into a game theory scenario where for the convenience, you can buy this pack that gives you better equipment, or you could buy this pack that gets better equipment. And because your opposition or people on the other team have better things than you, better guns, and you want to play the game properly. So, what would have originally cost you $20 suddenly is $1 here, $10 here, $10
Hmm.
here, and I'm assuming that these games must have data of people's spending habits, but
Yeah.
it ends up what might have cost you about, 40 or so dollars. You've probably never realized that you've spent hundreds and hundreds of dollars
Mm.
because um, the other team member has better stuff than me, then maybe get I should buy this extra thing for a couple of dollars, and it's a bit of
Mm.
a snowball effect.
Yes.
That this sort of data and these microtransactions are
Mm.
basically used against the consumer to exploit
Mm.
them.
Yes, massively. And like it comes down as well to not just like, getting a leg up in a game. It also comes down to time as well. Some
Mm,
games are built on that whole kind of, oh, you've timed out and like you have to wait so long for you to get to the next stage or be able to interact again with the game. Oh, here, spend a couple of dollars and you can jump through that and you can keep jumping through these periods where you're
mm,
left kind of in
mm,
situ and you can like continue on with the game. And like I've read some stuff about this phenomena, and it's very interesting because it's highly akin to gambling and like
mm,
poker machines actually. Specifically, they actually designed and use the same type of psychological tricks to get people to continue to spend money. And like undoubtedly, at least with a poker machine, you know, it's not reading the person's
mm.
trying to read the poker machine. But if they've got data on you and they know how to entice you to hit, to spend a little bit more money, I'm sure they're triggering you at the right point and the right
Mm.
time based, like you said, on your spending habits and the data they've got on
Yeah.
you, which is absolutely terrifying, if you ask me. Absolutely scary and uncharted territory. So, like, if you go back to that point that you made, like things
Mm,
that we were discussing 6 months ago, there are no digital rights, and it is a space where we spend like half of our waking time. Maybe that's too generous. Maybe it's
mm.
not generous enough. But we spend a lot of time in the digital realm these days. And so there are no rights to protect us there. And I think there needs to be some because it is absolutely manic what's happening out there because we
Yeah.
are consumers there and there's always been consumer protection of some sort. And so like I think that needs to be visited and addressed in some way or form and like a discussion happening about it. But I don't see the discussion. Maybe I'm not looking in the right places. Maybe you've seen more than I have for IS, but like I don't really see people talking about our digital rights at all.
No, I'd probably have to agree to you there. The closest we probably got was online bullying with everything that Scott Morrison was doing
Mm,
before he lost in the last federal election, at least
mm.
here in Australia. I can't talk to
But we both
about.
know that it's a completely different agenda going on there.
Oh yeah,
It's got
100%.
nothing to do with actual bullying. That's just another way of actually controlling people that are using the internet for its original glorified purpose, which is, free access to information and being able to actually use something liberally, and not being restrained technically, and just, being free to exist in some space where there are no limits or
Yes.
bounds. It's about roping all of that sort of stuff in. But yeah, so data in terms of how it relates to the person or the individual
Mm,
is something I think should be protected with some level of rights, like in most liberal democracies or liberal in the liberalized world, which most of us are subject to today, if not the
Mm,
entire planet, fundamentally there is this idea that, the individual is sacred and the individual has rights over their person, right?
mm,
We're not to be arrested without cause and like a fair
mm.
trial.
Yeah.
We are able to protect our privacy and our personal information. Like it's illegal for someone to open up your mail. Um, and like, theft of a person's identity is a criminal act and like all these
Mm,
type of things, but that none of that exists in the digital space. If anything, that's exactly what happens to you on a daily basis. Your information is literally hacked
mm,
daily and traded on this online platform and making incredible amounts of value, i.e., money.
mm.
And you get none of that.
Yes.
None of it. And ultimately, all right, fine. If this is not, then fine, a monetary thing. If people aren't going to get compensated for the value that they're creating, at the bare minimum, they should have control about whether it's used or not. That's all.
Mm,
As a bare minimum. Let's talk about money later. Let's say, compensation for their value creation. Fine. Let's leave that aside. But should they have control over it? 100% for IS.
this
100%.
might be we might be able to expand on this idea later on, but this has just popped into my head. But it might be a good example since uh, on the online world or the internet is basically the new frontier, if you will, because
Mm,
we've been increasing our our access to the digital space. But it would be very interesting because, a lot of progressives have talked about the idea of a universal basic income. This has kind of just popped into my head. It would be interesting that if your right to your own data ended up being linked to a universal basic income idea.
mm, mm,
I like, don't get me wrong, I've not expanded on this idea at all. This has just basically popped into my head. But if you're saying it, like, I think it's fairly obvious nowadays that these sort of companies are making a lot of money, or at least benefiting from this data retention on us.
mm,
If you could get it to the stage of turning around and saying, "Oh, well, you should be compensated X for something."
mm,
If you were to regulate it where it ended up being a universal basic income idea, where um, to use a bit of a Marxist term, if you're able to turn it into such a fashion where people are able to subsist off this idea, so it's not making people lazy, as probably a conservative would argue, but they just have enough that say it allows you to pay your rent, able
mm,
to pay
mm.
for your groceries, and then your needs that are low on the Maslow's hierarchy of needs. You have shelter, you have food, and all of that business.
The basics.
The basics are taken care of, and then
Mm,
but people are still free to invest, to have a job that they like, and
mm,
that sort of
mm,
thing. Like, it would be interesting if I don't know, somebody who's more of a genius than I am can convert this um, the profits that people make from
mm.
data into a universal basic income idea.
It's interesting that you bring up the idea of subsistence, right? Because yes, in the capitalist world, or yeah, in the capitalist physical world, you have labor that creates value, and they're compensated for their value with an income or a
Mm,
wage, as you were saying, right? But like the very interesting thing about labor, and this is quite obvious, it's so obvious that no one's really needed to talk about this until now, but labor is point in time. So you do your
mm,
labor, you get paid for it. It's done, right? It
mm,
gets it gets it gets put into the commodity itself, And then it's in that commodity, which is then sold off and distributed all around the capitalist world.
Mm,
But like data, there is no limitation on data retention. And so data is the gift that keeps on giving. It could be point in time for you back in 2016, but that data is still circulating out there and might be being used by companies right now to turn a profit on.
mm,
And then you could be right now making similar data, which is also making that same company or those same companies
mm.
money right now. And
Yeah.
so data is the gift that keeps giving. It doesn't matter if it was 5 years ago or right now, or if it's in 5 years' time, it will still be circulating in the background, making more money and continuing to exude value. So its capability is almost limitless, and it's ever expanding the more you exist in the digital space, the more tracks you
Mm,
leave behind you as you go, trekking through the digital landscape and the digital realm.
mm,
You are ever expanding in terms of your data creation and your value
mm,
creation. And so, like transferring it to a system of what you're saying, it wouldn't be hard to make a subsistence and be paid for your data if it's every time you go online and you do something, you're creating ever more value. So fractionally, if you just got like, a percentage of that or a fraction of a percent of that over time, going back, if you spent 20 years online creating data, you would be able to trickle that into some form of subsistence, translating
mm,
to a universal basic income of some sort. I know it's a new idea for us, but it's not that far-fetched, I think, if you think about the fact that unlike surplus value, data value is ever expanding and
mm.
potentially limitless.
Okay. Well, I think we've done a really good job of talking about the microeconomics. Now, I want to talk about data in an idea that Yanis Varoufakis has actually talked about, and that's the idea of techno feudalism.
Mm, mm,
Now, that kind of what I was talking about before about data being used for nefarious ways and I guess being used that in certain ways that you don't really anticipate. Now, what he talks about with techno feudalism is this is probably something that a lot of leftists don't really want to hear about, but especially since they had grand ideas of, changing capitalism or moving beyond capitalism. And what he's arguing is that there actually are already techno feudalists out there that have changed the game on capitalism and actually moved beyond capitalism and have created something far worse. So, like in the various talks that he's done, he's talked about there was this period in August 2020 in England where there was anticipated this idea of the markets that were going to crash, and the government and the central banks had anticipated that there was going to be
like GDP was supposed to drop, right?
yeah, like 20% or something
Yeah.
like that. And um, what basically the companies as well as these big tech giants and people that were investing in the stock exchange, what they thought was, hey, wait, the value of the money is about to drop. Why don't we buy everything up? And then buy low, and then once it hits back, we can just sell high.
Mm,
So because they kind of had the data and they just gamed the system, what actually ended up happening that day with GDP is for about 15 minutes it dropped and then it rebounded 10% up again. And what Yanis Varoufakis talks about is that that has never ever happened in capitalism. That there was such a jump with like not only stock exchanges but also economics
mm.
itself.
I think
And
it is, yeah, that they predicted that
mm,
GDP for the year of, I think it was 2020, was going to
yeah,
drop by 10%. And I think that was a big part in like to do
yeah,
with COVID, right?
yeah, yeah,
And
yeah.
so like they were all expecting that because it dropped, that the stock market might feel a bit of a hit, but they were expecting the 10%, so they were ready for it, and the stock market wouldn't have such an extreme kind of
Mm,
reaction to that pretty terrifying moment when you realize that like so much of the value that your country produces is just going to plummet, right?
mm,
Or has plummeted, sorry. But it actually went lower, it doubled that, and it actually had dropped by 20%. And so you would think that the stock market wouldn't be ready for that announcement and for those ideas. And so instead of actually the stock market plummeting, it actually rose for the first time. And like as Giannis puts it, like for
mm,
the first time in capitalism's history, England has dropped 20% GDP, which 100 years ago would have just meant like
mm.
global meltdown. And in 2020, it
Yeah.
meant that for some reason the stock market saw massive gains. And
Yes.
so I think what he's trying to highlight is the absolute disconnect between the financial world and the physical world.
Yes, thank you for saying that because what he goes on about is that rather than it's big multinational companies that are integral to the system, it's more actually the central banks. Because the reason of that disconnect
Mm,
was the idea of, well, these companies knew that the central banks were going to pump all this money
yes.
into the UK. They anticipated that. They jumped on the wave, and then they were able to sell
Yes.
high again.
Yes.
And what he talks about is, again, going into your data ideas of you have these companies that have all this data, have all the terms and conditions that they actually use your data without you really knowing it and giving you free stuff. What he talks about is your Facebooks, your Instagrams, your TikToks. They actually, we have in capitalism this idea of, hey, we have a free market. We do everything based off profit. There is competition. Actually, what is happening is there actually are online fiefdoms. So, as an example, you have Facebook. Now, when you go onto Facebook, rather than for example, you have company A and company B who are competing against each other and wanting to get a profit. What it's like when you actually go onto Facebook is you logging on to Facebook and you look at one shop. Oh yeah, that's owned by Facebook. Oh, that's actually owned by Facebook as well. And you actually walk along in this digital space. It's
Mm,
this entire area is owned by Facebook because
mm,
they basically give other companies access in order to have its advertising able to
mm,
interact with it because they have to sign up to their terms and conditions.
mm.
And this is where he gets his idea of online fiefdoms. In order to exist in this digital space, you have to kiss the ring of Mark Zuckerberg and Facebook in
Mm.
order to exist in this digital
Yes.
space. So
Yes.
now instead of Facebook competing in a market, competing in a free market, because
Mm.
they have these terms and conditions, they control the data that is in relation to
Yes.
their platforms. You are a humble serf on their land if you
Yes.
want to agree to it. And
Yes.
really, if you don't want to agree to their terms and conditions, you can chuff
Yeah.
off.
Yes. Yes, it's very interesting. And I think there's two things going on there with what you're
Mm,
talking about. So like
yeah.
let's if we take it back, I guess, to the what was happening in the economy kind of
Mm,
thing in 2020. Um, there's a complete disconnect now with the idea that capitalism, and this is what Giannis, I think, is trying to talk about, that
mm,
capitalism exists on the profit motive, which is what we were talking about before with
mm,
surplus value and all that sort of stuff. So capital accumulation means that you create more capital than you started with, and then you feed some of that capital back into the system to make more and more and more and more and more, and it goes on and ever, and you chase that profit all the time. Now, companies are very much at the highest level we're talking about here. Multinational levels, the biggest companies out there, and all that sort of stuff. They don't actually chase profit anymore. Like you were saying before,
mm,
when a crisis happens or there's a problem economically, the central banks in whatever country or whatever union it is, like the European Union or what have you, they just pump and print more money and pump it back into the system. So like there is no productivity that's driving profit anymore. Companies aren't out there, innovating and doing all this amazing stuff that produces such amazing, I don't know, commodities and products that everyone just wants to pump money into the economy to buy and access those commodities. It
Mm,
doesn't work like that anymore. At the biggest level, yeah, like I said before, the central banks just print billions of dollars, if not trillions, and
mm,
then just let the central banks feed that out to all the other banks who then lend things out. And it keeps, I guess, the whole world economy afloat, them just printing money. So
mm,
he basically states since 2008 this has been happening, and so capitalism, or the world economy as we know it, has just been
mm,
kept on life support. And so he thinks, so this is one issue there. If capitalism is not living and surviving off the profit motive anymore at the largest and most macro level, it's just being fed by governments printing money,
mm,
then capitalism has died in a form. And then you have in steps this space, or this world of fiction where like profit isn't actually happening anymore. There's no productivity. It's just money, fictional money just being pumped into the economy to keep it alive. In steps these tech giants, and they start to fill the void where innovation and productivity used to, I guess, consume or make up the economy. In steps Amazon, in steps Meta, in steps Google, in steps like all of these massive tech corporations that hold all this data, and like they create value to some extent, and they're propping up the world economy. And so you have these massive financial institutions which are being pumped money from the governments, who then are just looking for places to invest, usually financially on the stock market.
mm,
So they invest in places and like tech giants. And so these tech giants are getting bigger and bigger all of the time. And they're creating these worlds, as you called them,
mm,
which are feudal worlds in all senses of the term. Like if you think about when you go into the public realm to buy something, let's say you go to your local shops or wherever it
mm,
is that you go to buy groceries or food or have a coffee or whatever it is that you do, you enter into it via the public domain. So you walk down a street, or you walk on the sidewalk or the footpath,
mm,
but you get to choose which business and which shop you go into. And you go into that business. Once you're in there, you're in private property and you're subject to their rules and what have you. But you are making the choice. But in the digital realm, let's say you go shopping on Facebook,
mm,
you're, like you said before, you're signing up to their terms and conditions, so you're completely at their control. They can dock you if you're, I guess, a suspect character in their eyes, or if you do something that they don't like.
mm,
Not only that, and do they control your existence there? And like your reason for being there, they control what you see. So let's just say you're shopping for a skateboard, and like there might be 100 skateboard shops or suppliers on Facebook, but they've got data on you and they think they know what's best for you, or maybe they want you to see something. They're going to show you 10 skateboard
mm.
suppliers, only the 10 that they want you to see. And so you
Yes.
only think that there's 10 there. There could be 100 beneath the surface. How would you know? And so not only are they controlling the street, the virtual street you're walking down, but they're controlling your eyes
Mm,
and what you can see. And not only can they control what you can see in terms of, what's in front of you, they're also controlling the way that you exchange too, because you have to put your credit card into their system. So they control your monetary flow as well. So you can't just, do a backdoor deal with that skateboard supplier of your choice and like, try and sell things on a black economy and trade and all that sort of stuff. No, 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 no. You have to spend the money through their platform. That's how you guys interconnect with one another. And so on and so forth, to the most macro to the most micro level. Everything that you do is artificial or
mm.
completely under that tech company's control. From what you see to what you can do, everything is controlled by someone. Everything. And that's where you get feudalism, because in feudalism, everything is controlled by the local lord or the kingdom and all that sort of stuff. Every piece of property, every decision that you make is controlled in some way or another.
Yeah, I'm kind of glad that you brought that up of you basically being on uh, okay, you basically being on a shopping cart, if you will, and you being brought through
Mm.
Facebook or Amazon or whatnot, and do you just seeing those 10 skateboards that they want you to see, even though there's a thousand out there?
Mm.
Because that's actually the funny thing about these companies is really they've shown they've actually been found out to show products that that are related products to their actual brands, favoring the brands that are actually related to them compared to the average mom and pop shop that's probably out there. And
Mm.
all they've gotten is a slap on the wrist, and they'll
Yeah,
just go back to doing what they
yeah,
want to do.
yeah.
And yeah, like it's again, that word, nefarious,
Hmm.
because there's really nothing more that you can do. It's kind of what Albert Wanger in his book After Capital actually talks about, is that when you actually have these sort of systems, these online digital worlds, if they were being truly democratic, or if they really wanted to give you proper access to the data or these kind of programs, these kind of platforms, um, they would actually let you be able to see the code in the background. Like
Hmm.
you're obviously seeing things on
Yeah.
the user side of things. So
Yes.
obviously you see the nice, pretty page that
Yeah.
Meta is on or Amazon. But if they really wanted things to be fair, they would show you the like. Sure, I guess in that kind of a perfect world that I'm espousing, everyone would know coding, but the thing
Yes.
is, if they actually wanted to give you true freedom and basically not spoon feed you the products that they want, they would
Yes.
let you see the kind of coding. He uses a very specific word. I think it's because he's an IT guy, but it's basically whatever the user platform is that lets you see the coding in the background where
Hmm.
he says that, oh, maybe for what we actually truly want, we can set up bots that, flag, something that we want for this, or
Hmm.
maybe a certain type of products for that.
Yes.
That's not really my expert level of expertise, so I can't really talk about it that much. But we're basically, as you were saying before, our eyeballs are fixed on the products or the advertising that they want you to see. You're a guest on their land.
Mm.
This isn't
Mm.
a free market.
Yes. And I think it's interesting that you say you're a guest on their land because at the end of the day, and I talk about this in the video log that I've done recently called Data Slave.
Mm,
And it is, if you don't like it, I make a point in that video, then, stop using the internet and give up having a smartphone. Whereas
mm,
in a feudal society, you can't just give up feudalism. You're tied to the land, and if you try to escape or anything like that, there's nowhere else to go, essentially. And yeah, there's no other option really. Now, in the tech feudal world, there is the option of not existing online. And so someone like David Harvey, for example, he talks about why he thinks that, while it's a lovely notion, techno feudalism, or calling capitalism feudalism now, or it's turning into something else, is essentially wrong. He says it's just another form of capitalism. And like capitalism is very dynamic and
mm,
it's ever changing. It's never, yeah, in situ. Like, 150 years ago, it was all about the factory laborer and it was centered around that type of production. Now, production is very different and our value is created very differently and all that sort of stuff. And we could really argue that this is just a different form of imperialism because it's
mm,
really about monopoly and control, mega control over certain spaces, hyper control over certain spaces, and by conglomerations of companies and stuff like that. So it's just another form of capitalism because, yeah, the value is created differently now and it's collected in a digital form and it's controlled by central banks that print money and feed to these massive institutions, but it's still capitalism.
Mm,
But Giannis's point is it's quite interesting how that profit is not the driving force. It's still a massive motive though in capitalism,
mm,
but it's not the driving force in the capitalist economy anymore, since that it is completely artificially kept alive by just pumping money into the system. But money is still important and integral to it. And I think David Harvey is right there, because a large part of capitalism, or well, capitalism is the circulation of money, capital in the money form.
mm,
And so it's still happening there. You still have that money circulation driving the system, whether it's being just printed en masse by central banks or actually created by capitalist innovation. It's still circulating and the lifeblood of the world economy. So it's interesting that, you know, you'd have two very good arguments either way, but I see Giannis's point, and I like this idea of techno feudalism, but I think it is an appendage of capitalism,
mm.
if you know what I mean.
Yeah. And yeah, I see what you mean. And I kind of feel like they both have really good points.
Yes, yes, undoubtedly.
Hmm. Okay, with that, I feel like that's probably a good place to leave it there. As always, we have the synthwave art, and the prompt here was rebels fighting against the fighting on the in the online fiefdoms. And yeah, it seems as though that's digital police holding people back, which I thought was
Yeah,
an
wow.
interesting take on it. But
Yeah.
yeah, uh, as always, I'll make sure to put that on my Facebook. And yeah, if thank you everyone for joining us. And remember to keep thinking and keep learning. And to sign us off, I'll leave it to you, Mystery.
Thank you very much, 4AS, and to all of you out there. Please remember, I am, you are, we are a mystery.